Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, I am so deeply grateful that you're here. And I want to start off the show today by asking you a favor. This is something I've asked in the past, but it's something that I will probably never stop asking. If you have been a longtime listener of the show, even if you've only listened to the show a few times, and you are digging it, and the message is landing, and you feel like this podcast is benefiting your life in some way, I would be ever so grateful if you would take a few moments to head on over to iTunes and rate and review the show. There is so much that goes into this podcast in terms of time and energy and resources, and it is very helpful on our end to have ratings and reviews to get the podcast exposed to more women. So if you have 5 minutes in your day, it probably won't even take you 5 minutes, but I would deeply, deeply appreciate you rating and reviewing the show if you have not done that already. Now, recently I put out a question, I believe it was on Instagram, about topics that people were interested in hearing more about. What are some of the things that people want to hear more about this summer? And one of the topics that came up actually multiple times was stress eating, emotional eating. And I thought this was such a great topic. This is actually not a topic that we have done a deep dive into in terms of any specific podcast episode to date. So I thought, let's go there today. So the reason I think that emotional eating is such an important topic to cover is for a few reasons. Number one, it's really common. It's really common for people to eat their emotions rather than feel their emotions. We call that buffering, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later on in today's episode. And the thing that's important to remember about emotional eating is that it's not really solving our problems. It is helping us to feel something other than what we're feeling for a few moments. But it has tremendous consequences to our health story down the pipeline, especially if we are in the habit of emotionally eating. Furthermore, it creates a lot of integrity pain. We want to be showing up for ourselves in certain ways, and emotional eating can often be an obstacle to being able to do that. So I think this is an issue that a lot of women rumble with. I think most people listening to this have experienced emotional eating on some level. Clearly, there are varying degrees of emotional eating. And what's interesting is a lot of women I have coached through emotional eating are often in a mindset where they think that the cause is that they have a lack of willpower, that something is wrong with them, that they are broken in some way. And none of that is true. So let's talk about the real cause. Why do we emotionally eat? Well, I think there's a few main reasons. This is probably not an all-inclusive list, but these are the things that I just want to bring up today on the show because I think these are big reasons for a lot of people. Number one, a lot of us fail to honor that resources like time and energy and willpower are indeed limited. So we only get so much of them in the day. The other thing that I think contributes to emotional eating is not taking care of ourselves in a way that helps us to stabilize our chemistry. And we'll talk a little bit more about blood sugar and all the ways in which chemistry can get disrupted and affect our desire to eat in just a minute. And the other reason I think that we emotionally eat is because we're in the habit of buffering. We're in the habit of feeling something other than what we're currently feeling. So rather than feel lonely or feel sad or feel disappointed, we eat to feel something other than difficult emotions. We're not really allowing ourselves to feel and process emotion in healthy ways. And our culture makes it really easy to maintain that habit because at every corner, at every turn of our life, food and alcohol is available to us. So it is a big part of our environment, and it's an easy thing to say yes to. If you're feeling anything other than good, here, just eat this, just drink this. So I want to go into each one of these in a little bit more detail and give you some real tangible solutions, things that you can start practicing to improve your own emotional eating. So let's talk about this first component, which is honoring that willpower is a limited resource. So first, let's define willpower. I've done entire podcasts on the concept of willpower, but willpower, in my view, is your capacity to follow through. That's all willpower is. You set an intention, you make a plan, you make a promise to yourself, and willpower is your ability to follow through on that promise, your ability to follow through on that commitment. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that willpower wanes throughout the day. So you might wake up feeling like you are so in control. You might finish the day feeling like you're out of control. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that we're organizing ourselves, the way the amount of things we're expecting ourselves to accomplish and be able to follow through with in any given day. We are tapping out our willpower often by 12 o'clock, by noon. And where does a lot of emotional eating happen? It's not at breakfast, not even at lunchtime. It's usually in the later afternoon and into the evening hours. And willpower is, of course, renewable, but it is limited. And at the end of a busy, stressful day, we simply do not have a lot of it left in the tank. So if we are not organizing ourselves and structuring our life in order to make follow through more easy, then we are going to consistently faceplant at the end of the day. And then, of course, a lot of women use that as rationalization for why they'll never succeed. We have to make it easy to follow through, especially the busier and fuller our lives are, and especially later in the day, which is really interesting because when I work with clients to organize their day, to help them show up for themselves in a way that feels really good to them, a lot of women understand the concept and the value of planning and organizing. And they will go all in until about noon. So they'll pre-decide their day about halfway through. But where do we tend to struggle the most is later in the day. So if you are someone who is kind of planning, but you're only like 1 foot dipped into the pool, meaning you're only planning your day up until about noon, and you feel like you're not making progress, I would challenge you to make a plan for how you want to be in relationship with food, with alcohol for the entire day. And part of that plan includes padding your environment. What in your environment needs to be removed because it makes it so much harder to say no. In other words, I was talking to my Rumble and Rise community about this recently. My husband works for a client right now. My husband's a builder, and this client is consistently making him chocolate chip cookies. And she brought over, I think it was like 24 chocolate chip cookies. And they sat on the countertop. And I have a very difficult time saying no to chocolate. It's something I'm working on. It's something I've worked on for a long time, but I really love chocolate. And the longer those cookies sat on the counter, the more tempting they became. Who do you think in our household ate the most of those cookies? I did. And they made me feel like hell because when I eat a lot of sugar, it actually hurts my joints. That's where I notice it the most. I also become pretty reactive emotionally. And so I did not take responsibility for padding my environment. I knew it was dangerous to have those cookies on the counter, but I chose not to do anything about it. And so when I was tired, stressed, and hungry later in the day, guess what I ate? A lot of chocolate chip cookies. So padding my environment in that situation would have looked like asking my husband to take the cookies to his shop, asking my husband to put the cookies in his car, giving them to my son to maybe take to school, right, to his class, giving them to a neighbor, potentially even throwing them in the garbage. That's what padding my environment looks like in that scenario. So where are you right now not taking responsibility for padding your environment? And that lack of responsibility is making it much easier for you to emotionally eat. And the other thing about planning that I just want to mention is that planning our days, organizing our time, we understand the value of that when it comes to our to-do lists and feeling productive in our work and our personal life. But making decisions ahead of time around food is immensely powerful, especially when it comes to emotional eating. Why? Because when you are well fed, your chemistry is more likely to be balanced. And when our chemistry is in check, we're not experiencing things like overhunger. So I'm not saying that emotional eating is exclusively caused by hunger, because in many cases it's not even caused by hunger. But when you are hungry and you are experiencing a lot of difficult emotion, it just compounds everything. It makes it more difficult to not emotionally eat. So this is my second point. To improve our relationship with food and to not stress eat, we've got to keep our chemistry in check. Because if we're experiencing a lot of low blood sugar, if our hormones are way wonky, biology is always going to win, right? Hormones are powerful messengers. They drive biology. They fire us up to go out and look for food, even though we may have just eaten a little bit ago. That's what wonky hormones can do, is create a lot of out of whack messaging. So when we eat well, we fuel our bodies well throughout the day, we actually feel less hormonally disrupted. Our blood sugar is stabilized, and we feel more in control around food. So under eating for long periods of time makes it even more likely that you will emotionally eat. Balanced chemistry makes it way easier to manage emotions in healthy and productive ways. So this is always something I feel the need to explain in my work. There's really kind of two sides to the work that I do with my clients. Number one, there's the side of balancing chemistry, because chemistry hugely influences our decision making, right? And the other side that I teach is managing our emotions and thoughts so we are willing to experience urges without answering them. So we are thinking in ways that are actually helping us to produce the results we want. So we can actually follow through with the commitments that we make to ourselves. And a lot of times I'll get the question, well, which one is more important? Balancing my chemistry or learning how to manage my thoughts and emotions? And I see those things kind of needing to be developed side by side. It's not, I know it feels like the chicken or the egg conundrum, which one comes first. But I really think that they both kind of need to be developed at the same time to get the biggest impact. So when it comes to stress eating or emotional eating, also acknowledging that it's simply a habit. Why is that important? Because man, do I see a whole lot of women beating themselves up about all the things that emotional eating means about them. And they're making it mean things that really hurt. And that's not necessary. The reason emotional eating is a problem for a lot of women is simply because they have practiced it a lot. And the beautiful thing about neuroplasticity, which I'm always reminding you of, is that at any point in our life, we can decide to practice new things. And remember what a habit is. A habit is simply something that you have practiced so many times, you can do it without having to think. So your brain literally just reacts and doesn't have to do a lot of work in order to perform this habit that you have. So we can kind of sleepwalk. We can we do emotionally eat and not really have to think about what we're doing because we've done it so many times. So just the act of starting to slow down and be conscious of what we're doing can be a big first step in starting to change that behavior. But the truth of it is, new practices like not emotionally eating, which is going to require planning your food so you stay well nourished, learning how to allow urges, learning some skill sets like how to actually think about your own thinking. So journaling is a really powerful practice for that. It's certainly not the only practice, but it is one that a lot of people are familiar with. But new practices are going to require that you are willing to experiment and that you are willing to get messy, which means you're not expecting yourself to be perfect. I feel like I say this in every podcast episode, but truly the word practice is so beautiful because practice is something that we do to build and ultimately maintain proficiency in something. And baked into the definition of practice is messiness and imperfection. So think about any new skill, like think about your career, what you do to make money. When you first started doing that thing in your life, I guarantee you weren't very good at it. There was a lot you didn't know. There's a lot you had to learn. You made a few mistakes. Maybe you made a lot of mistakes. If you're a parent or you have small children in your life, think about how they learn. They learn through the messiness. They learn through making mistakes, being willing to do things wrong, and actually having fun doing it. Kids are awesome at building new practices because not only are they willing to get messy and imperfect, but they have a great time in that messiness and imperfection. I think we need to take a page from that book. So if you are someone who is really interested in improving your relationship with food, especially in stressful times, learning how to not emotionally eat so often, what new practices are you willing to develop in dedication to that? And of course, this is a large part of the work that I do with my students and clients. I help them develop practices that help them develop new habits and weaken the old habits that are not serving them. So the final thing I want to just kind of do a little deeper dive into here, because it's so important when it comes to emotional eating, is learning to develop emotional agility. So I just asked you that question, what new practices might you need to learn? And developing emotional agility might be a skill set that you're missing right now. A lot of people are. I certainly was for a very large majority of my life. So what is emotional agility? Emotional agility is our willingness to experience the full spectrum of emotions and process emotions in healthy ways. And when we are stress eating or emotionally eating, that is not processing emotion in healthy ways. And why do I say that? Because when we stress eat, we are eating usually very quickly. So we're not really digesting our food well. We aren't eating because we're hungry or because our body needs fuel. Although if your blood sugar is low, yes, there is that element. But a lot of times we're emotionally eating because we don't want to feel what we're currently feeling. So the eating or the drinking will help us to feel something different. It'll help us to feel something better temporarily. And I emphasize the word temporarily because we all know that it's not a long-term fix. You have not processed that emotion. That original emotion that was so uncomfortable for you, you didn't process it. You didn't take care of it. You didn't listen to the message it had for you. You just numbed it. You traded it out briefly for something else. And when emotions aren't really experienced and fully processed, guess what they do? They get louder. And when they get louder and you have a habit of numbing them out, guess what you have to do more of? You have to eat more. You have to drink more. You have to do more of whatever it is that you do to not feel or to feel something that feels better. And I think I believed for a long time, and I know a lot of my clients are kind of in this space where we think we deserve to be happy all of the time, that we should feel good all of the time. And I think that's dangerous thinking because that is not life. Life is going to present you with so many things you didn't expect, so many challenges and obstacles that you never could have seen coming. And in the midst of those obstacles and challenges, you're going to be feeling a lot of things that are not fun to feel. They're difficult emotions: sadness, frustration, disappointment, self-doubt. These are all realities of the human experience. But if we convince ourselves that something's wrong when those things show up, or that we're not supposed to feel those things, or that we deserve to feel something better than that, then we reach for these false pleasures, these things that offer temporary gratification and pleasure, but have long-term consequences. So we eat the chocolate chip cookies on the counter, right? We eat the chocolate cookie dough or the chocolate chip cookie dough that's in the freezer. We eat the bread. We drink the alcohol. And we're living in a world that sells us these things. We are sold pleasure. At every turn, it's cheap and it makes us feel better fast. So it kind of feels like a magic pill until it doesn't, right? It just keeps numbing out the truth of your life. And physiologically and psychologically, you start to experience more and more dis-ease. And eventually, I hope, you start realizing that there's some unlearning to do, right? And when I say unlearning, I mean we have to start considering, what habits have I built? What skill sets do I need to learn in order to pull out of this? And a big part of that for many, many people is learning how to process emotion in healthy ways, which is emotional agility. And I've mentioned it many times on the show in all the spaces and places where I teach. But if you've never read Emotional Agility by Susan David, it is a phenomenal book. If you want to dive a little deeper into this concept of emotional agility, that's the best place to start. So how do we start processing emotion in healthy ways? Because I think that's a sticking point for a lot of people. They might hear me say that and say, okay, well, that makes sense. But how do I even begin that journey? I don't even know what to do to process emotion in healthy ways. Well, I think it starts with how we think about emotion. Like if I was going to ask you, if we were sitting across from each other right now having a cup of coffee, and I said to you, explain what emotion is, how would you describe that? Have you ever even stopped to consider that? All emotion is a vibration in the human body. But what we make emotion mean is so terrifying in many cases that we go to great lengths to not experience a vibration in the human body. So one of the starting places for a lot of my clients is learning how to just start naming and noticing their emotions, not changing their emotions, just naming and noticing what is going on for them emotionally. And this is a really challenging exercise for a lot of really smart people. Why? Because they're out of practice. They haven't been in intimate relationship with their emotions in so long. They have to sort of create the space to get to know them, maybe for the first time. So we just name the emotion. I'm feeling frustrated right now. I'm feeling anxious right now. And I will tell you, just naming is difficult in itself. So if you're someone who isn't really sure what you're feeling, I recommend just starting by kind of describing to yourself, narrate to yourself what's going on for you physiologically. So I'm feeling a tightness in my chest. I feel like I can't really breathe. I feel like my muscles are really tense all over my body. Explain what you're feeling in the body as a byproduct of the emotion. What does the vibration feel like? I also give my students and clients an emotion list, and you can Google this. You can just Google list of emotions and print one out. So you have a great list on hand for starting to just familiarize yourself with the spectrum of human emotion and how they differ from each other. So, number one, how we define emotion is important. How are you defining emotion? Because right now, if you are a stress eater, an emotional eater, you're defining it in a way that is freaking you out, which is why you're buffering. So you're feeling stressed and you're making stress mean something really bad. And then you're emotionally eating because you want to feel anything but stress. So you could start to practice the thought, emotion is simply a vibration in the human body. Stress is simply a vibration in the human body. What does that feel like exactly? Where do I feel it exactly? Start naming and noticing throughout the day the different emotions that you're experiencing. If naming is hard, start narrating it, right? Talk it out to yourself. What are you experiencing exactly? Even write it out. So writing pen to page is always a powerful step in helping us to get to the root of what's causing the emotion. Because emotions are a byproduct of your thinking. So when you put pen to page in a moment, or even after the fact of feeling a really difficult emotion, write about it. Write about why you think you felt it. Where was it coming from? What was going on at the time? And you will get a lot of thoughts on your page, which you then get to explore. Are these things true? Are these things useful? Do I like my reasons for thinking this? And that's where we start taking our power back. Because we start looking for the message. We start looking for the message within the emotions. Because all emotions are messengers. They all have something to tell you about how you're living your life, about how you're showing up, about where decisions need to be made, about where boundaries might need to be set. And if we're always numbing and distracting ourselves from those emotions with food, with alcohol, with 10,000 other things, we never really get to learn and grow from those messages. So just to quickly recap here, 4 things that we've talked about in terms of helping with stress eating or emotional eating. Number 1, organizing your life to reflect the fact that willpower is a limited resource. So setting yourself up, especially later in the day, to stay in a good relationship with food. That might mean padding your environment. It definitely means making some decisions around food ahead of time, pre-deciding what you might need to do if you are feeling stressed or you are feeling something that's difficult for you to feel. How else might you cope with that? Keeping your chemistry in check is a really important piece of reclaiming or building emotional agility. If our blood sugar is always low, if our hormones are really wonky, if we aren't feeding ourselves in a way that provides the nourishment our body needs, we are going to feel even more charged around food. And it's going to make stress eating and emotional eating all the more likely. Acknowledge that emotional eating is simply a habit. It is how you have been coping with emotion for so long. You do it without having to think. So when we put thinking back into the equation by just pausing and noticing what we're doing, that can be a powerful first step in breaking the cycle. We have to be willing to practice a lot, because how many years have you been emotionally eating? How many years have you been reaching for whatever it is? I'm sure you have a food of choice when you're feeling stressed. So don't expect just because you practice one time or for a week or for a month that emotional eating is all of a sudden no longer an issue. It takes practice. So what skill sets are you willing to start practicing? Not for a few weeks or months, but for the rest of your life. And if you struggle to define that, what those practices might be, you really need to come join us in Rumble and Rise, because this is what we talk about. I set women up with a lot of practices and skill sets so they can develop emotional agility. They can take control of their mindset. They can balance their chemistry and completely revolutionize their relationship with food and alcohol and themselves. So you can find out more about Rumble and Rise by just going to graceandgrit.com/ready to rumble. And the 4th thing that we talked about is emotional agility. The necessity of developing emotional agility if you truly want to get out of the spin cycle of emotional eating. So I hope this was helpful to somebody. I know there's many of you who asked me to cover this topic. Clearly, this could be an entire podcast in itself. Somebody could start an entire podcast on just stress eating. There would be something different to talk about every week for years. But this is just kind of just a general overview of some of the things that I would encourage someone to start working on if they really rumble with stress eating or emotional eating. Again, if you are a longtime listener, you really resonate with the message of the things I share on Grace and Grit, and you're looking for community and support in developing new skill sets to improve your health, check out that Rumble and Rise membership. So again, graceandgrit.com/ready to rumble. It's super inexpensive. And it is, I promise you, I over-deliver. There is so much. There's so many resources, so much support, such an incredible community. I know you won't regret it if you join us. So that's it, my friends. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you again next week. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.